Hey, everybody. Let me make sure that I'm on here. You think I'd be getting better at this by now, but you never know. Hmm. Hang in there and bear with me while I get this figured out. Oh, and it looks like I am there. So awesome. It is 5 o'clock my time, so it means it's about time to start. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Lindsay Venn. I am a physician assistant and a registered dietitian, as well as a founding member for the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. And it's my goal to help people learn more about what they need to know when it comes to their health and how to do that and improve that naturally. And so I try to pick a different topic each week to go over and educate you specifically on that topic, and then give you some sound advice as far as what you might think about either speaking with your doctor about or adding in some strategies on your own when it comes to your diet and your lifestyle. And so we'll just go ahead and jump right on in. Let me share my screen real quick. And if you didn't know, tonight's topic is on fatty liver disease. And so it's a very hot topic. And you're about to see why it's such a hot topic, because it's a big problem in the world today. So again, my name's Lindsay. I'm here to teach you a little bit more about fatty liver disease and what you need to know and the evidence out there to show why I'm teaching what I'm teaching. So, and always, as always, please feel free to put in some comments. If you have questions, go ahead. I don't always see them until the end, but I will do my best. So again, you can find me at Venn Integrative Medicine. You're either seeing this on my Facebook or my YouTube page, so hopefully you know where to find me. These all do get recorded on my YouTube page, and so if you weren't able to catch it all live, or if you want to share it with somebody, just go to Venn Integrative Medicine on YouTube, and you'll be able to get the recording and share away. So first, just like always, I do like to say I am not your doctor. This is not personalized medical advice. I am just here to provide you with the education and information to give you the education and authority when you're speaking with your doctor about this specific topic. And so first, what is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And so I do put here in this little box, you can see now they've actually rechanged the terminology on it. They now call it metabolic associated fatty liver disease, which we like a lot better, because what the non-alcoholic part tells you is what it's not, and what we want you to know is what it is. And so this is very, very tightly correlated with insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, etc. So this is when we have an accumulation of fat in the liver where it's not supposed to be. We call this ectopic fat. So fat's being stored in a place where it's not supposed to be stored. Our liver was not designed to store fat. It was designed to do a huge host of other things that MAFLD or NAFLD, however you want me to say that, really plays an important role. The other piece is it's not associated from things like alcohol or liver conditions such as hepatitis C. So this is truly a metabolic problem, and that's what gives it the phrase or the name that it has. So I'm going to use these terms as I move forward with this. So MAFLD, M-A-F-L-D, for metabolic associated fatty liver disease, versus MASH. And MASH stands for metabolic associated steatohepatitis. And so that's a mouthful. I completely understand. But what it is at the beginning, when we start to develop fatty liver, we just have an accumulation of fat. And so this fat isn't necessarily terribly harmful at this point, but it soon will be. And so that's when these fat cells actually become pretty inflamed. And that's when the steatohepatitis name comes in. So steato stands for fat. Hepatitis means liver inflammation. And so these cells in the liver become inflamed, and that's a real problem. This actually does very closely resemble alcoholic fatty liver disease and can be quite a big problem. So just so you know the terminology I'm using in here. So we do have different ways to grade the stages of fatty liver. And so it goes anywhere from mild grade 1 down into more of a severe grade 3, or they look at the level of fibrosis that's occurring. And this is really just fibrotic tissue. When those fat cells in the liver become really inflamed, they actually become more solid and therefore unable to function like they're supposed to. And so now there are things called FibroScans that people can get to determine the level of fibrosis that's going on and how good or bad it is depending on what's going on. So like this fibrosis stage 4, as you can see down here, is actually full-on cirrhosis, where the liver is completely fibrosed and not able to do what it's supposed to do. And at this phase, this isn't reversible. At all the other stages, it is reversible, but once you get to this final phase or the cirrhotic stage, it's not reversible and is a significant problem. So how common is it? And I had to look all this up because it's changing as we go. And so way back late 1980s, early 1990s, it was only about 5% of our population. And you can see here is that it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And right now they're estimating somewhere between 35 and 38% of people actually have this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It is directly correlated, meaning that it is caused by metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, obesity. People with hypertension tend to have those as well. So we tie hypertension in there, but they go together for sure. The hard part about this is, and we're going to talk about it further on in this presentation, is that fatty liver is really hard to diagnose and there's no screening criteria for it. So this current number that we have is the ones we know about. I would wager that this number is at least double that because it's really hard to diagnose. You don't find it until things are actually really pretty bad. It is the most common form of liver disease worldwide. And so this slide I really like because it shows how prevalent it is in all kinds of places. Europe's got 68%, they say 52 in East Asia. It's all over the place. And it's surprising that the United States has a lower number there, but it is extremely common when it comes to the prevalence worldwide. This is just the where that image came from. This is the study that showed that, and they showed the real correlation with type 2 diabetes. It is also, sadly, now the most common cause of liver disease in our kids. And so, unfortunately, there have been studies done on this, and just like they're showing increased prevalence of insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes in kids, they are also showing an increase in this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And you'll see in some of the posts that I've done where, what we're doing to our kids with things like fructose, which we'll talk about, is almost as bad as giving them alcohol when it comes to their liver. And so it's going to be a real big problem moving forward, and something that we have complete control of and can reverse actually pretty quickly. The other problem is it's now increasing in the number of hospitalizations for non-alcoholic fatty liver. It's not talking about your cirrhosis from alcohol or from your hepatitis C type of things. This is just the increased prevalence of people being hospitalized for this condition over time. So it is becoming more of a financial concern as well as a burden on the hospital system concern. And then the transplant demand is increasing. We never used to do transplants for this MAFLD scenario. We only used to do them for things like cirrhosis. But as you can see here, the number of requests or demand for liver transplant for this non-alcoholic form just continues to go up over time. So it's a pretty sad and serious situation. So how do you know? How do you know if you have this or not? Most people, it is completely asymptomatic. They have no signs that they have any kind of fatty liver going on. In some, when it becomes the more severe form, the steatohepatitis form, there can be some right upper quadrant pain that can occur. Our liver lives underneath our rib cage on the right side. And so you might get a little bit of discomfort in that right upper quadrant. Sometimes you can feel it on exam. And so if I had a patient on my exam table, I would have them lay down flat on their back and have them, really, really relax as best as possible. Try to poke some fingers up underneath those ribs and see if you can feel the liver. If you can feel the liver, we call that hepatomegaly or enlarged liver. You shouldn't be able to feel it when you're doing a normal exam. When it comes to your blood work, the liver enzymes will become elevated eventually. This is very late in the process. Like I had mentioned earlier, you don't find it. It's really hard to actually find with things like blood work because it takes so long for those liver enzymes to become abnormal that you're often well into the progression of the disease by the time that this is caught. I tell everybody, if you have insulin resistance, you very likely have this. And so if you know you have insulin resistance, you probably also have fatty liver. So what else can you do to find out if you have it or not? So right now, one of the best ways to do it, one of the least invasive ways, but yet most confirmatory ways, is by doing what they call a fatty liver index with ultrasound. And so they'll do an ultrasound of your liver, and there they can look at the level of fibrosis. But to calculate the fatty liver index, they're also going to look at a fasting insulin level, which is fantastic. They're going to look at a fasting triglyceride, and then they're also going to take into account your BMI and your gender. The other lab that they might pull is called a GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. It's another mouthful. This is a more specific liver enzyme that will become elevated sooner than the typical AST and ALT that are in your comprehensive metabolic panel. And so this might be another lab that people will look at to really calculate out to the best of their ability this fatty liver index and diagnose you. To formally diagnose somebody with fatty liver, you have to have all of these things, not just one of them. And so one, you either have to have some kind of imaging or ultrasound of the liver. We will find incidentally from like abdominal MRI or CT scan, you can actually find fatty liver. Again, the ultrasound that I mentioned, or they'll actually do a liver biopsy to figure out what's going on. This person needs to not be a heavy drinker. And so they cannot, if they have that heavy drinking, you can't diagnose them with the metabolic associated fatty liver. You'd have to try to weigh in there is this more related to alcohol, or is this more related to the metabolic things going along with it? You have to be able to exclude other things like hep C or other forms of liver disease. And you have to not have a coexisting chronic liver condition in addition to what's going on. And so some really good things that we have to pay attention to, but again, hard to diagnose. And that's why that 35 to 38% number, in my opinion, is so far off, because people aren't doing all of these things. The gold standard to get diagnosed with fatty liver would be a biopsy. And so this is an invasive procedure. It's not a comfortable procedure, but it does give us the gold standard, because they will actually pull out those tissues and be able to say, okay, yeah, this is the level of fibrosis, this is the level of inflammation. So that gold standard is truly the biopsy. But again, most of us try to do the less invasive ways of diagnosing this first. And here's the part that frustrates me, hence the little emoji down in here. There are no screening guidelines for fatty liver. They just actually don't even recommend it because there are uncertainties around which test to use. And so people are not screened for it. It's not like a mammogram looking for breast cancer, or a pap smear looking for cervical problems, your DEXA scans looking for osteoporosis. There are no guidelines to look for non-alcoholic fatty liver. And so this is really, really frustrating, because again, I bet that number, that 35 to 38%, is at least double what they say, because nobody's looking for it and nobody's making the assumptions that somebody may or may not have it. So let's talk about how this happens. I'm not going to go over this slide in a lot of detail. I just wanted to illustrate how complex this process is. But when we're developing fat in the liver, we do this thing called de novo lipogenesis. So this means new formation of fat, technically, in the liver. And so for the most part, it starts with glucose, which is our carbohydrates, that will get converted throughout this complex process. And the liver, this hepatocyte, the liver itself will turn that into triglycerides so it can store it as fat. It's too much glucose leading to this problem. We're also going to talk about too much fructose, but this is how that happens. The liver creates fat from sugar and turns it into, this ectopic fat storage in the liver. But let's talk fructose, because this one is by far probably the biggest problem, sorry, there's a little bug floating around, both for the obesity, the type 2 diabetes, the prediabetes that we're seeing in our kids, but also the fatty liver. We do see when fructose goes up, there is an increase in this. So fructose intake had de novo lipogenesis at 23%. In a normal person, we're only at 10%. And so we really have to pay attention to that fructose intake. And I'm going to keep going here. So what happens here is fructose is metabolized very differently. The liver actually can't metabolize fructose like it can glucose. And so what it actually will do is turn that fructose into triglycerides. It really leads directly to fat and fatty liver when it comes to what the body is able to do with it. At least glucose, we can do other things with it. We can turn it into glycogen. We can burn it in other ways. but fructose does not have that. The liver does not have that capability when it comes to fructose. So this study, I really like this one just to see. So the glucose is this lighter gray color and the fructose is this darker gray color. And so this is the intake on that. But what I really want to look at here is this visceral adipose tissue when looking at glucose compared to fructose. Visceral fat, this is a big difference here in the level of visceral fat accumulation when comparing fructose to glucose. And we can say visceral fat is equal to or is just as much of a problem as the fatty liver piece. And so that fructose piece is really quite a problem. This is just the study that was there that also talked about those things. But what it really says here is that dietary fructose specifically increases de novo lipogenesis. It promotes dyslipidemia, it decreases insulin severity, and it does increase visceral fat in otherwise healthy adults. And so fructose in itself is a really big problem. And if you look at your food labels, you know that high fructose corn syrup is in just about everything that's processed nowadays. It's a really big problem. This one looked at what happened with glucose versus fructose when it came to changes in de novo lipogenesis. And so this glucose, again, is the lighter gray line. When compared to fructose, there's a significant difference in the amount of de novo lipogenesis or fat storage in the liver going on. Fructose is definitely more of a problem when it comes to what's going on in the liver. So in the United States, you know, this didn't even come about until the 1960s. And now they think it's more than 20% of our total daily carbohydrate intake and 10% of our energy intake. This is an increase of 2,100%. It's absolutely insane how much processed food has really impacted things like our fructose intake in the US. So where else does fructose come from? If you're thinking, well, I don't eat processed food, I don't have to worry about fructose because I'm eating, you know, whole foods, it can still be a problem. For my big fruit eaters, there's a lot of fructose in certain things. So for example, raisins and pears are over here at, you know, 11 to 12 grams per serving of fructose in it. We have watermelon, we have apples, we have some dates. So you really do have to pay attention and make sure to focus more on these foods that are lower in fructose when you're picking your fruits out. And so paying better attention can be really helpful. You know, with insulin IQ and with my patients that I try to keep lower carb, I really do focus on berries. And as you can see, a lot of these berries do have a fairly low fructose concentration. So still a good choice if you want to stick with the lower glycemic fruits. So now let's talk about insulin resistance. And so this is a big problem. When they looked at patients who did or didn't have a biopsy, metabolic syndrome was associated with greater than half of them. So 53% in those who did not have a biopsy, 67% in those who did have a biopsy, and 88% of people with this NASH or this steatohepatitis did have metabolic syndrome. And so it is really strongly correlated with insulin resistance. You know, and they did, as it says here, they did correct for things like age, gender, BMI, et cetera. It is the metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance that is the major driver of fatty liver. So I always use this as an example. For those of you who don't know what foie gras is, I've never had it myself. I don't know that I ever want to, but foie gras is fatty liver of a goose. And you might ask yourself, well, how in the heck does a goose get fatty liver? Well, they do it on purpose. They force feed these geese grains and carbohydrates to the point where their liver becomes very fatty, kill the goose, and now all of a sudden you have this, what's considered a delicacy of fatty liver disease. We do the exact same things to ourselves. If we're stuffing ourselves with grains and carbohydrates, we're driving metabolic syndrome and therefore fatty liver in addition. So it is associated, even in our lean subjects, if you have fatty liver and insulin resistance and you're thin, so the TOFI type of people, the thin on the outside, fat on the inside, you can still have fatty liver. Even if you're skinny, you can still have it. And so it's something really to pay attention to. At Insulin IQ, we've definitely included it in our little Plagues of Prosperity spider web. And so it is a known side effect of insulin resistance. Here they looked at actual insulin doses in people. And so when they looked at how much insulin was actually in the system compared to the amount of liver fat, there is a direct correlation when it comes to the more insulin, the more hepatic fat you have. And so we do know this again to be true. Here they looked at overfeeding, a short-term overfeeding of carbohydrate. And so they looked at it just for a little period of time. And so they looked at their baseline, which is here, and the percentage of liver fat that they had. They overfed them some carbohydrates and watched that liver fat go up 27%. And the same with the de novo lipogenesis went up by 27%. They lose the weight, they cut the carbs back down a little bit, and this fat, it does return actually quite quickly. The liver fat piece does return to baseline pretty quickly if you can stop that overfeeding of carbs and return weight to baseline. So, and this is just another study. This is the actual title of it. If you ever want to go look these up, you certainly are more than welcome to. But this one looked at kids, I believe it was, as I say that. Yep, adolescent boys. They went and they looked at what happened when they were on their usual diet versus when they went on a low sugar diet. And these drops that you can see here in the amount of fat percentage in the liver was actually a lot better in this low sugar diet compared to these ones over here who are eating their average diet. So they actually put it in numbers here, 25% down to 17%, where this one only dropped 1%. And so we do know that the sugar intake does cause a big problem, even in those adolescents. The other thing that they looked at, and I really like this, is they looked at intermittent fasting and low carb diets to see what the difference was when it came to fatty liver. And so here they did 3 different arms in this study. So they had your standard diet, they had a diet that incorporated intermittent fasting, and then they followed people who had a low carb diet. And as you can see, the standard diet didn't have much change, but yet the fasting had a reduction by over 50%, and the low carbohydrate had a reduction by 53%. And so, and the really cool part about this was only a 12-week trial. In 12 weeks, they reduced their fat percentage by 50+%. And so it is quick, it is fast, and in my opinion, it's fairly simple. And I always tell people, imagine if you could do both. Do a low carb with the intermittent fasting, all of a sudden I bet that percentage is even higher. And so you can make really big impacts really quickly on your fatty liver disease. And as you know, I do like to promote this system called the Feel Great system. It is there to make fasting and low carb eating easier. That's the entire point of it. Not everyone is perfect. I had a patient this morning who said, it just is so hard. My wife and I don't eat the same. I just really struggle with getting as far as I need to get with a low carb kind of diet. And so that's where this comes into play just so beautifully. It does help lower insulin resistance. It does make your fasting a lot easier. That's what's in my cup. That's what's in my cup every day. I don't have a whole lot of time to eat either before or between meals. And so it can be very helpful when it comes to calming the food noise and the appetite. It does boost GLP-1, which we know is a very, very beneficial in the body when it comes to improving insulin sensitivity, which there in turn would improve your fatty liver. It does help also improve the gut microbiome. And the best part about it is if you try it and it doesn't work for you, you can get your money back, which I really love about that program. The other piece that I didn't mention was the fiber component of this. Above and beyond improving the microbiome, it will lower that glycemic effect of food. And so again, if you're struggling with getting the right level of carbs or down to the right level of carbs, the fiber, the balance can actually be quite helpful at decreasing the impact those foods have on the body. So what is my big takeaway here? And this was a quick one. I'm kind of glad, but my big takeaway, it can be reversed, and it can be reversed very, very quickly. And like I said, 12 weeks in that study and people were completely reversing their fatty liver. You need to incorporate some intermittent fasting, and there's a variety of different strategies to do that. You do need to get those carbs down, particularly this one down here, the fructose. We want to get that down as low as possible, if not completely gone. And then there's also the lovely tool of the Feel Great system that you can add in if you need additional support. I always tell people, you don't learn how to ride a bike without the training wheels. Sometimes the training wheels can be helpful, and that's where this comes into play. Anyway, so I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a lot. Like I said, fatty liver is a bit of a hot topic, and people always have questions about it because their doctors, like I said, they don't go looking for it. They don't screen for it. They wait until your liver enzymes are so bad that you're, way into the woods when it comes to it. So if you have insulin resistance, like you've seen on my other videos, make sure to test for the insulin resistance itself. And then, assume that you have the fatty liver going along with it. So let's see here if I can find where I'm at for questions or comments. And of course, it's never as easy as you want it to be. Let's see here. Okay, mute myself on there. So let's see here what we've got. We've got a few watchers. Thank you for watching. Yvette's tagging people. I appreciate that, Yvette. John says great information. Jennifer loves the comparison. Awesome. Jennifer says, I did everything Lindsay has told me and I completely cleared my fatty liver. Checked it by MRI. And Jennifer is a fantastic example of the power of a low carbohydrate diet. She has just killed it. She lost over 100 pounds, completely reversed her fatty liver. If you don't follow Jennifer, you should follow her. She's one of our fantastic insulin IQ coaches that she's brilliant and she's great at application when it comes to how to do this the easiest way. So yay. I don't see any other questions or comments. Again, if you didn't get to watch this live and you want to go back and watch it, go to my YouTube channel, Venn Integrative Medicine. I do have them all there and recorded, and you can always go share away. I will be on, it looks like on Wednesday with Yvette. So if you want to do some Q&A, we'll be talking, of course, about fatty liver, insulin resistance, metabolic health. So check out that post that I put out just a little bit ago, and you can join for that live Q&A in there. So anyway, everybody, Linda says thank you. You're welcome, Linda. If you need anything, make sure to reach out. You can find me at vennintegrativemedicine.com. I'm happy to do one-on-one consultations and get some labs or some things that you might need when it comes to fatty liver, and to give you some personalized advice ethically. So, all right, everybody have a great night.